Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this first session on Agile development at Dreamforce. My name is Steve Green from Salesforce.com, and in the next hour, we're going to share some of our experiences of using Agile practices and principles to deliver 3 major releases per year in a predictable way. So what we hope you're going to get out of this essentially is some advice and some tips and hopefully some inspiration to take these Agile practices back to your own company and develop your own innovative apps on the Force.com platform. Today's session, the format is a panel, and there's going to be 5 panelists. These 5 panelists are 5 leaders of our R&D organization, and I'll briefly introduce them, and then they'll get a chance to talk a little bit more later about themselves. First, we have Chris Fry, who is the Vice President of Core and Platform Development for the Salesforce service. We have Rajni Ramanathan, who is one of my favorite people at Salesforce, and she is the Vice President of Quality Engineering for the company. Mark Abramowitz is the Senior Director of Product Management within our application group, and Jason Winters is a Senior Manager who heads up our UI design team. And finally, Brian Zotter is the Director of Development within our platform organization. And they'll come on stage here in a short while. But all of us collectively have many years of experience using Agile practices in an effective way. So we hope our advice is going to be useful to you. So let's get started. The safe harbor statement you've seen many times over the last couple of days. So the session, essentially, I'm going to cover in a few short minutes. I'm going to cover the Agile methodology that we use at Salesforce, but more specifically, I'm going to focus on the principles that we use as a basis for this methodology. Second, the panelists will come up and they'll introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how Agile is applied to their specific discipline. I'll pitch a couple questions to our panelists, and ultimately, most of the time will be spent in answering your questions, so we'll open up the floor for any of the questions that you have about applying Agile in a software development context. Again, my name is Steve Green. I head up Products Program Management at Salesforce and have overall oversight of our Agile practice. This is my 5th year at Salesforce, and about 3 years ago, we implemented Agile at Salesforce in something we call our adaptive delivery methodology. And this methodology has provided dramatic results for our organization and certainly for our customers and partners, and it's the basis really for our ability to deliver those 3 major releases every year in a consistent and predictable way. So let's start by talking about the ADM release cycle. So as many of you know, we deliver 3 major releases per year in February, June, and October, and every year it's always at the same time, February, June, and October, and those releases are about 4 months apart. In fact, they're exactly 4 months apart. And the reason we do that is to create a cadence within our own organization around releases, but also a monthly cadence. And in our Agile context, our monthly cadence is really the iterations by which we operate. And what we tell teams is we time box everything that we do at Salesforce in terms of developing software for the service, and the teams get to vary the scope, but the dates are essentially fixed. So we ask them to build features every month and finish them so they're production ready, and then they demo them at the end of that month. And it's a very effective way to provide transparency throughout our organization. And again, this helps us deliver that predictability that we have in delivering those 3 major releases on time every year. So what is ADM? ADM is our own flavor of Agile. The adaptive delivery methodology includes the Scrum project management framework, which many of you probably know, and some XP practices, and really is based on the lean principles from manufacturing. So I'm not going to go into the detail of ADM here in this presentation. If you are interested in more detail about ADM, at 10:15 there's another session down the hallway where we're going to talk about ADM and its application within our IT organization, and that's room 307 down the way. But what I'm going to focus on for just a few minutes is the principles by which we base everything that we do at Salesforce. And those principles are the 7 lean principles. So let's take a look at those. So number 1 is to eliminate waste. We put a lot of focus at Salesforce on eliminating waste in developing our software because, of course, it makes us a more effective organization. One of the most common wastes we have in software development is technical debt, which are bugs and deferred refactoring. And that technical debt has a negative impact on the quality of our products, customer satisfaction, and it also has a negative impact on the productivity of our teams. So we try to focus a lot on how can we eliminate those things that don't add any customer value. There's other types of debt like status reports that nobody reads, meetings that we're in that are unproductive and don't provide any value. But really the number one waste in software development in our industry is building features that our customers don't want or don't need. So essentially one of the practices that we have that's key in our model is to really prioritize the work and the features that we're going to build and only build the things that are most important to our customers today. The second principle is to build quality in. Now, most software development in the world is done in a waterfall way, which means that we do all the testing and validation at the end of the development cycle. In an agile model, an ADM, we take all the testing and validation and everything else that we need to do to build our products and get them to production, and we do that throughout the entire development cycle in an iterative way. So building quality in for us really means building features and functionality in very small increments and small iterations, testing that functionality immediately, and then giving it out to our customers and getting feedback as quickly as possible. Some of the techniques that we use and practices at Salesforce to do this are continuous integration, checking in to the code line every single day from our developers, and then we have about 40,000 automated tests that run on every single check-in every single day. The third principle is to respect people. And of course, most of us think about we want to be treated in a respectful way in the workplace, and that's certainly part of this principle. But the real spirit of this principle in an agile context is that we try to hire the most talented people in the world. And we want to unleash the talent of those individuals so that we put them on Scrum teams, these small, tight teams, and then we push decision-making down to those teams to create a bottoms-up culture. And so what that does is it creates a whole set of teams that are empowered and are self-organizing and make their own decisions about their particular product line. And so how that works in practice is our teams decide the priority of what they're going to build, they decide how they're going to build it, and they also decide how much they can build in each one of those monthly iterations. Now, optimize the whole. This is actually one of my favorite principles and one of the most difficult for teams to understand. And this principle is applied both on a global level and also at a team level. Globally, we have about 60 Scrum teams that work on the Salesforce.com service in R&D. And what we want to do is optimize the work of all of those teams and optimize the value of the Salesforce service over optimizing the productivity and value of any single team. At a team level, essentially, we have a cross-functional group of people that are working on each Scrum team, and that team is focused on optimizing the throughput of the entire team and delivering value quickly and innovative value quickly to our customers so we can get feedback. And we do that as opposed to trying to optimize the work of any single individual on the team. So again, this is a hard one for most teams to embrace and understand, but it's one of the most powerful principles that we have in our model. All right, create knowledge. Create knowledge is really about creating a continuous learning organization. And at Salesforce, we really value innovation, and innovation really can't flourish in any organization unless you have consistent and unrestricted flow of ideas and information and knowledge from team member to team member, from team members to managers and to an executive, so vertically in our organization and also horizontally. And this, again, helps our organization thrive and really focus on innovation every single month in each one of our iterations. Just-in-time decisions is the sixth principle. And what this means is we want to delay irreversible decisions that we have to make as long as responsibly possible in our development cycle. In the waterfall model, typically what most companies do is they try to plan their releases and all the features up front by building out all of the specs in detail in the abstract without actually developing any software. If we want to make decisions, and that actually when we do that, we're taking away some of the capability of the team to really innovate during the development cycle because all those decisions have already been made. And at Salesforce, when we use our agile model, essentially when we want to do just enough planning at the beginning to get started, and then let the team start building software and continue to learn throughout that cycle to continue to flush out the overall plan and make those product decisions all along the way instead of at the beginning of the release. And finally, number 7 is to deliver fast. And what this means is creating a culture of delivery within your organization. And at Salesforce, we definitely have a culture of delivery. I think every single day people are always asking, what have you delivered for me today? I know you delivered something yesterday, but that was yesterday. What's happening today? And we do that in our model. We think about not just about a release, not just about an iteration, but what's happening every single day to deliver. So we want to build functionality and features in small increments and then get feedback, push it out to our customers internally and externally as quickly as possible and get feedback around that functionality. So these are the 7 principles by which our methodology is based and which all of our work is based. But what has this actually gotten us? So at Salesforce, we've been doing ADM for about 3 years, and there's a lot of benefits to ADM. But ultimately, I would summarize it as saying ADM has brought us on time, high quality delivery. And over the last 3 years, we've delivered 9 major releases since we moved to this model, and every single release has gone out on time, at high quality, and packed full of innovation. So it's been very successful for us at Salesforce. Now keep in mind, it's not a silver bullet, and it's extremely challenging to do this in your environment. But if you can execute effectively in an agile context, you really will reap the rewards and see some of the competitive benefits to doing the model. So with that, I'm going to bring the panelists on stage, and I'm going to give them a chance to. And I'm going to ask them to do first is to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they do at Salesforce and talk about how Agile and how ADM effectively works within their own discipline. So Chris, why don't we start with you?
Hi everyone. So I'm Chris Fry. I run the platform and core teams. You've been looking at a lot of the technology that my teams build along with everybody else on the stage. I was one of the original folks with Steve that helped roll out ADM inside our company. And for me, what it brings is the ability to operate at scale with teams that are essentially self-directed and don't require a lot of intervention. And what you get is a ton of transparency in our organization. So if you do need to work with a specific team, you know exactly what's going on with that team. So you might, you can go and work just with the teams that need you versus having to work day to day with every one of the 30 Scrum teams that essentially work in my organization.
Good morning. I'm Rajni Ramanathan. I'm Vice President of Quality Engineering. I've been with Salesforce now for 10 years, and I'm responsible for defining the vision and strategy around the quality of all our product lines. So Steve already talked about this. I think the foundation of our development methodology is to design, develop, as well as deliver a quality product from the ground up. And as all of you know, in the software industry, adding on quality after you design and code is not going to happen. It has to be from the ground up. And you know, this has been our philosophy from the beginning, but as our teams got larger and the product more complex, it virtually became impossible to deliver to this vision using a traditional waterfall methodology. So we took a hard look at our processes, and as Steve said, we moved to this, 3 to 4 years ago. And what I'd like to add to what he said is what the difference it's made to the teams is it makes it possible to have a forum where you have a mechanism for providing constant and instant feedback, immediate feedback. There's a lot of transparency between team members. And also I can't emphasize this enough. I think one of the keys to our success is the amount of importance we place on automation. Automate as you go, automate as soon as you get started with the design and coding. And it's easier said than done because a lot of people still ask me, how do you automate and write tests before you code? So this is something that we have to still constantly focus on and ensure that we're getting this right. So building quality in from the ground up, I think, is key to the success of using this methodology.
Hi, my name is Jason Winters. I'm a senior design manager on the user experience team. I've been with the company for about 4.5 years, and for me, the agile experience, as it affects us as designers, the two that stick out in my mind are eliminating waste, not only in the features that we're delivering you and designing for you, but also in the deliverables. As designers, we're spending more time focusing on the prototypes and not on the specifications, and that really allows us to spend more time iterating and improving our designs. Also, delivering fast, so we're getting our designs in the hands of the users and getting feedback sooner. I think that also presents some challenges, which are, as we chunk things into smaller pieces, it's easy to lose sight of that long-term vision, and that's something that we always work on and something that we're iterating on and getting better at.
Hi, I'm Brian Zotter. I'm a director on the platform team under Chris. I've only been here about a year, but I've been a student and advocate of Agile for probably 10 years. I started in the banking industry in the 90s, and two things that come to mind that they don't do very well is deliver fast and eliminate waste. Apologize if anyone's from the banking industry, but this is back in the 90s. So I knew there had to be a better way, and I was an engineer, and it was very frustrating to not see my code being used in production. So I had a chance in 2000 to start my own company, and I looked really into Agile as a way to make me more efficient, make my team more efficient, and it was hugely successful. So I saw the power of what it could do for a 5-person team, so I came to Salesforce about a year ago to see what we can do at this large scale. Instead of 5 people, like 50 Scrum teams or 60 Scrum teams.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Abramowitz. I'm in the product management organization at Salesforce. I run a number of teams related to our Sales Cloud applications and strategy. I've been with the company for about 4.5 years, so I've gotten to experience pre-Agile waterfall life at Salesforce as well as post-Agile life. And it's just, there's no comparison really to the ability of our teams to execute and the quality and just the innovation that we're able to deliver these days with Agile versus Waterfall. It used to be, as a PM in Waterfall, it was anybody who's experienced it, long Word documents, lots of long drawn-out meetings trying to answer every single question that could ever come up before you actually sit down and write any code. And so as we transitioned into Agile, from a PM perspective, it's really refreshing at the freedom you have, and the emphasis shifts from writing long documents and trying to figure out every single question ahead of time to being a much more of a collaborative experience with people on Jason's team in the design world, people on the QA team in Rajni's world, and the development organization with Chris. It's just that it's much more of a collaborative team effort to work through the innovation, and the feedback that you get, and the delivery focus is tremendous. I mean, the fact is we do 3 releases a year. It's challenging. Scope is what changes, so a lot of that ends up being product and customer-oriented decisions as to what to include or not to include. But generally, I don't see, it's like, I don't know how we used to do it in Waterfall. There's no way to go back. It's just an amazing transition for the product organization at Salesforce to be able to leverage Agile and really deliver lots of releases, lots of innovation very quickly.
All right, great. Thanks to all of you. Thanks, Mark. Fantastic. So I'm going to pitch a couple questions to these guys, and then we're going to open up the floor here. We'll put a mic out there, and you all can ask any questions that you want. So for the panelists, the first question is, so when we moved to this model at Salesforce 3 years ago, some of our executives said, I don't believe there's any way that you can build anything of value in 30 days, because certainly we were used to year-long release cycles, and we'd have months and months to do design work, et cetera. But how do we build something in 30 days, especially since a lot of the stuff we do at Salesforce is complex and does take more than just one 30-day sprint? So how do we actually do stuff that's more complex that takes longer than 30 days? Chris?
Yeah. So my answer to this is always, time-boxing boosts creativity. So first of all, there are at least 2 projects we have done from conception to deployment in 30 days at Salesforce. One was when we built our API cursor servers to offload load from the database. And that went from conception to essentially stacking hardware in production in 30 days. And that was quite an amazing experience. I wouldn't want to have to do that every 30 days, but we have had to do that in the past. We also had we've done some security features in 30 days. Then the other thing I usually say to people is, well, usually you're going to have to check in something every day. It's not like you check in, for a 90-day project, you wouldn't check in everything on day 89, right? There has to be a way that you can decompose that project into a way that you can think of delivering incrementally. So rather than, say, staging the project so that you build the back end, then the middle tier, and then the front end, you should think about a way that you can deliver something that the customer can use every 30 days. So it may not be perfect, you may not have everything done, but your goal should always be to deliver something of value within the 30 days. So that really doesn't answer the question, which is, how do I do something longer than 30 days? But that's usually the way I answer it.
All right. Rajni, you want to take a shot at that too?
I'll add to that because, during Mark's keynote, you saw us announce a lot of new features, but we never specified when it's coming out. And I think the key to this is, even though the goal is to have shippable code every 30 days, we're not putting pressure on the teams to say, you need to release this in a fashion that customers can consume in 30 days. We release the code. The release goes out on time. That's where we put the emphasis. But if the feature is not ready to be used by customer and it doesn't meet the quality bar, we're not turning it on. We're not giving it to the customer and say, be a guinea pig, go use it. The code needs to be very stable, meet the quality bar, the automation standards have to be met, and we release it. But the feature, the functionality itself is available to the customer only when we think it's ready to be consumed. And I think that's the big difference. You ship releasable code, but you ship functionality when we feel that it's going to be adopted immediately.
So some comments from sort of the product management perspective is, I actually think the agile methodology lends itself very well to building longer, more complex projects, because it actually, in the 30-day sprint, makes you focus on what's important right now and only address what you have to answer and detail and specify sort of for that sprint or that iteration. And so you actually get to focus and build something that is usable and useful to an end user in 30 days instead of waiting 90 or 180. And so what we're able to do is we try and focus on kind of, especially at the beginning of a new feature, kind of going all the way through the stack. So is there something simple we can do in the user interface that drives some of the business logic, that drives some of the data model, that we can do that all in one go, or in one sprint if possible. And so you touch kind of all aspects of the capability from front end all the way to back end in that iteration, and then start to build out broader and broader as you iterate more and more. And so if you think about some of the things that were announced just this week, right, whether it be Chatter or some of the things that are closer to my heart with cloud scheduling or our new Outlook integration, and these are things that are going to take a year end to end, but we are delivering production code and finished capabilities every month to build out to a set of value that is worth releasing. And so I think it's hard to get your head around. 30 days isn't a long time to build something that's complex. But when you go into that rhythm and the cycle that Steve explained at the beginning of the presentation about 3 releases a year and making it rhythmic and predictable, it's really amazing what it lets the teams do who are empowered to make decisions about how they want to approach those longer-term projects.
All right, great, terrific. I'm going to pitch another question to the panelists, which is a question that we get quite a bit. Probably the number one question that we hear from our customers and partners and others that are interested in doing Agile. And that is, in our Agile model, each of the teams has a release plan. They're working on their sprints. They've committed to delivering something in those 30 days. And at Salesforce, suddenly, Mark Benioff has a great idea. And he says, I want this done, and I want it done by this release. But we've already made a release plan, and we're already committed to delivering something in that sprint. So how do we handle that?
I'll take this one, Steve.
All right.
When Mark comes to me and he says that, I tell him no. We're in the middle of a sprint, and my guys are working, and I'm trying to protect my team. But no, the reality is, at the beginning of the sprint, we're working on the highest priority things by definition. And if something does come in that needs to be put on the top of the list, then we blow up the sprint, we call it. We have to do a whole other sprint planning and start from the beginning. Usually the requirement isn't that severe. It can usually wait until the end of the sprint and be put into the release plan in the next sprint. If you have a team that has a lot of this, like we did in sites, we got a lot of requirements coming in, it's best to shorten the sprint iteration. So, we went down to 2 weeks. So at most, you're only waiting 2 weeks to move the next highest priority thing on the list into the next sprint.
I'd like to add to this. So I think the beauty of agile is being able to react to what the demands from customers are and the market conditions too. And because we work in 30-day iterations, if you need to change course or work on something else, then at the most you've lost about 30 days of work, and you can shift course and focus on something else that's been deemed as important. And this is not usually what I'm saying inside. When we are discussing features, obviously we want to make sure what we worked within the first 30 days is again not going to impact the release or introduce risk, because now we are shifting course. But again, that's the whole beauty of the model. You're not wasting too much time building things that you need to put aside for a moment and work on something else. And also it helps you, enables us to change course if need be.
Yeah, and one other point is it's really crucial that you're operating in a debt-free environment and that you have a huge automation bed, because that's what lets the team be flexible. If the team has sort of built a ton of stuff in the first sprint that isn't done, then you have the problem of going back and figuring out what's undone and done. But that's why it's crucial to continuously operate in a debt-free environment.
I'll just say quickly that I say yes when Mark asks, and but then there has to be an honest conversation about what the consequences are, both from a design standpoint and also on the development side. And if we're cutting something that's going to affect the usability of the feature that we were going to release, then to Rajni's point earlier, maybe that one's not going to go out in this release, and so we turn that one off.
All right, so some great answers. And really, the last thing we want to do to our teams in those situations is pile more work onto the teams when the teams can't really deliver it. We want to stay in the world of reality when we're developing these features and not make promises that we can't keep. So now we'd like to open up the room to any questions that you might have for our panelists. Yes? All right, who'd like to take it?
Yeah, I have a lot of trauma.
I would second
work
the
out on
nightmares,
stage.
actually.
We went,
Chris, can you just repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. So the question is, what was it like, I think, to do the transition going from sort of a waterfall organization to an agile organization? A lot of people were here, actually, when we did the transition and helped in it. Steve and I was the product owner, and Steve was the Scrum Master of actually the team that ran the transition. And there was definitely, it was very intense because we wanted to do kind of a small pilot. And Parker actually asked us to do it for every team and transition every team in under 3 months. And at the time, that seemed like a really bad decision. But now I look back and realize that's the only way we would have made it. If we'd stretched the transition out over 2 years and we were still trying to prove the ROI, we wouldn't have done it. So getting the whole organization behind where we were trying to move to was crucial. And I think probably the key thing that we did was inside Salesforce, we didn't position it as something new that we were moving to. It was more of a return to our values as a startup. And how do you keep every team operating like a mini startup inside a larger company? And so it wasn't, hey, here's this new thing that's way better than what you've been doing. It's, hey, let's move back to the way we used to operate. So I think that was probably one of the key things that we did.
Yeah, I think what Chris just said is pretty crucial because, and also Steve mentioned this earlier, we hire the best. We go after, people that bring a lot to the table, add a lot of value, and as the organization grew larger, we were leveraging that collective wisdom. And we recognized as a whole team that, we're not using the smartness of our people. Things are getting longer and productivity is really going down. And, releases were not really happening on time. And these were really important things for us from the beginning. We've always had 4 releases a year from the start of the company. And when things started slowing down, we didn't like it. It's always been in our DNA to be disruptive innovators, and then we didn't see that happening fast enough. I think we were ready for change, and having that mentality of, hey, how do we get back to our roots and make ourselves successful again? I was one of the skeptics. We were really, we did have a hard time moving our entire teams over. But I think thinking back, that was one of the best things we did. Instead of trying to do pilot or try to get 3 to 4 teams experiment with this, we moved the entire technology and products organization to use this. And that enabled us to get into a rhythm very fast. So it might not be easy for all organizations to do, but looking back, it's one of the best decisions we took.
So just a couple points to add to that. I mean, again, from a product management perspective, to echo Rajni and Chris, is that we knew something was wrong, right, with the way that we were developing and things were slowing down, or waterfall, something was in the way. And so the promise of Agile was something new and different, and something that would help our organization become just more effective in what we're doing. And so it's not to dismiss, there was a lot of training, product owner, Scrum Master, for developers, for QA people. We did invest and continue to as we onboard people, but we had a sense at the time that it was going to be better, and we would have better creativity, better collaboration with our coworkers. And so generally, I think people were open, for the most part, to try it, especially from a product perspective, because it was going to help us do more and deliver more value to our customers, which, if we go back to one of the key values of our company, is customer success. And so we saw waterfall basically getting in the way of us delivering more value to customers to make you successful.
Okay, next question. So the question is, why don't we push out to production every month?
To start, we would love to, but actually a lot of our customers don't want us to too. We are lucky to be one of the very few companies that produce enough features so fast that our customers are always telling us we are really 2 or 3 releases behind consuming it, so actually slow down. And I mean, there are also logistics in terms of what do you gain from releasing every month to the customers directly? Is there ROI? Are they benefiting from this? And does that, there's also trade-offs between the overhead of doing the release versus the benefits we get, right? So the release itself for us, because we don't want to impact all our customers at once, we stagger it. So even though you don't know it, for us a release takes about 6 to 8 weeks. And because we release it incrementally to every single instance on the data center. So it's the trade-offs between the ROI and the benefits.
I'd just like to say, I would like to go faster. I would like every change list to be deployed in production. You check in a change, it runs 40,000 tests, it automatically gets deployed. There's a system that monitors it, make sure there's no regressions, make sure there's no performance degradation, and then it's live in production. That requires a huge investment in automation and infrastructure, but I think that's the ultimate nirvana.
Okay, next question, right here.
Is the Scrum team an entire sort of set?
Sure. We can answer that pretty quickly. So the goal, the goal is like who's on a Scrum team. The goal is that each Scrum team has everybody on it that they need to build everything that they need. So they're not doing sort of resource negotiation across the business to actually execute on something. So there's usually on every Scrum team there's a product owner who's usually a product manager, a Scrum Master, maybe somebody on the team, or Dev Manager, QA Manager, Project Manager, and then Dev, QA, documentation, usability, sometimes even systests, sometimes even somebody from our technical operations team if the team is operating in that. So the goal is everybody on the team that you need to get your work done.
And just to clarify some of the commitment to the team, so we have different types of resources, and those resources, say on the design side and the usability side where we have fewer resources, they need to be shared across teams. And that was something that when we first started, we spread it too thin. and there comes with that too much overhead. So ideally, those people are dedicated to those individual Scrum teams, and you have one person for to those Scrum teams. We found a model for design where we're able to put 2 designers or 1 designer on 2 Scrum teams, and in some cases it's a one-to-one relationship depending on the sort of the size of the feature. But really trying to keep that as clean as possible as far as the assignment to the teams has the most success. So 1 person on 1 team. About 7 or 8 people, I think, is probably the average for the Scrum teams.
We like the teams to not really be more than 10 people, because once you get above 10 people, the relevance of what's happening for each team member starts to degrade. So the conversations start to become more and more irrelevant for team members. Okay.
And also, for example, Chatter that you saw yesterday wasn't just developed by one team. A lot of times we form work groups, so there are maybe 15, 20 teams that need to come together to deliver on one customer-facing end-to-end functionality.
Okay, let's take the next question. Over here.
Hi, the question I have is regarding when you do development, it seems like the Scrum process is very feature-driven, but when you actually start doing development, it's almost inevitable at some point that you're going to encounter issues, bugs, things that have to be addressed. So how do you handle those type things and still prevent it from interfering with the overall, your sprint process, your 30-day cycles? How do you prevent it, the bugs and issues that need to be resolved? How does that fall into this whole process?
I think, so if I sort of rephrase that question, it's how do we deal with sort of production, support, that sort of thing, or bugs that you discovered during the sprint? So for us at Salesforce, trust is our #1 value. So actually we wouldn't want to interfere with solving, say, a customer issue. So the only thing we ask of the team is that at the end of the sprint, they report what they were working on, and if it was working on our customer case that whole month, that was the right place to spend that team for that month. So you just measure and react versus trying to plan it away. Now, obviously, we're always trying to reduce the amount of we're trying to increase the quality of the product, so we reduce the amount of production support we're doing. And then our goal is always that the bugs that you find during the sprint are fixed during that sprint so that you don't carry them over into the next sprint. I don't know if, Brian, you wanted to...
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to say is we actually plan for some refactorings where we know that this particular area has a lot of work that needs to be done, and we sell it to the product manager like, listen, we can go faster. We can go faster if we fix this, if we get it right, so we're not spending a lot of time on customer cases and doing bugs and support for it. So next release, we can get even more features done for this particular area.
And also during the planning phase, either for sprint planning or the release planning, the team doesn't dedicate 100% of their time just for what they've identified for the release. They also set aside time for supporting the previous release, because as we are working on the next release, the previous release is just going out, so they do set aside time to plan for unexpected issues that might come from production. And if the time is not taken, they would then go faster with their plan, what's planned already.
All right, next question, right here.
Thank you. Just to make sure I got it right, is the production system then changing every month, but with each release you just switch those features on, or is the production system only changing with every release?
Do you want to take that one?
I didn't quite hear the question.
So the question was, I think, how often are we releasing to production, and do we release to production at the end of every sprint? Short answer is no. We do have the ability to patch production at any point, which if we find a high priority customer case, a bug or some issue maybe in the way the feature is working, we do have that ability to release within a day if we have to, because of the huge automation test bed that we have. But we release essentially the release every 4 months at the end. And we do sometimes release a feature that we do not turn on, and then we will enable it over the course of the release. So that does happen as well.
I mean, there are other examples, just to draft on what Chris said, of where something is released, but it's not turned on at all, right? If you think about what went into Chatter, there were some things in previous releases that were built and kept quiet, and in there, it hardens those capabilities so we know that they're ready to go when we do make a major announcement. But generally, it's every 4 months is when production is going to change. But we absolutely have the ability to keep things quiet, turn them off, not expose them, while we continue to iterate and build the more complex features that can't get done in a single release.
A follow-up on that one. Talking about Chatter, because it probably took more than 4 months to develop that, of course. Okay, so you actually delivered it partially, but you just haven't turned it on. So in our production systems, we kind of have Chatter, but it's not active?
So, do you want me to do?
I guess to clarify, so I mean, we can break it down. There's specific Chatter is a very broad application, right? That was announced as well as a platform. And so one specific thing, like the subscribing to an opportunity, right, which is a really good Sales Cloud use case for where Chatter can play, right? And so that ability to say, I'm following this opportunity, was something that we built more than one release ago. And because of the broad vision of Chatter, decided to keep it. It was in the product. It was released into production, but never turned on for any customers and never exposed to any customers. And this goes to another whole area and a whole other panel on how we provision and how we control the user experience for individual users or our customers in Salesforce. There's a massive amount of investment and innovation that's gone into kind of the behind-the-scenes provisioning systems for how we enable features, how we turn on extensions that fall into this and allow us to have this security that when we test a feature and it may not be ready for prime time, but we want to get it out into the release, we know that we can hide it from all of our customers because we have the right automation and we have the right provisioning system to keep that quiet. And so it's something that the company has developed over time. You may have heard about Black Tab, I don't know, but it's sort of this behind-the-scenes view of how we turn and hide and keep things on or off for customers. It's how we run a pilot and say, only these 100 orgs are going to get the new Outlook integration because we're only going to give it to them. And so with Chatter, there were a couple things that were deep in the application that we waited till we have this groundswell and the big announcement to actually expose to customers.
Also, when we do massive enhancements like this, what we'd like to do is, Steve alluded to this earlier, we want to release, get feedback, and iterate on the product design also. So we turn it on for product owners work with a limited set of our customers to do, just pilot of certain features, get the feedback, and then we build that into the next release cycle.
All right, next question. Right here.
Hi. I'm interested to know how sort of building new functionality, the UI around it, i.e. making it pretty, and the user experience team work together. So what order does that kind of happen in? You got that?
If I heard you correctly, were you asking when is that work happening or how is it happening? Not quite able to hear you.
Okay. I'm trying to understand how building functionality and then the user interface around it is a separate thing, and the user interface team, how those all kind of work together. So with a Scrum, you can imagine, I'm guessing,
sure,
test it quickly. It won't look very nice, but maybe it will later. But then you have to go back around the loop again to sort of design it. So how does all that work?
Right. So the user experience team, we are a centralized group, and we have designers that work on the individual Scrum teams. And when we do the design work, very early on, we'll look at building out sort of a vision and prototypes of what we're, in the case of Chatter, we build out a pretty broad vision for that. Then with each release, we start to get in, and each sprint, we start pulling off chunks of that and getting deeper into the design. We also have within the user experience team usability analysts and researchers who we're testing with. So we test with customers all the time. We get feedback. We iterate the designs. And to the earlier question about when we release things and what we release, we're not only testing the usability of the features, but we're testing the utility and how much when we're at a point when we're ready to release. And that process and that iterative process just keeps going and going and going, and it never ends. And that's what and we love that process because that's what allows us to get hear the feedback from you and get things out quickly.
I would just add, I mean, it's core to the entire process. The user experience and what it looks like is as important as what the data model looks like, right? And so we take it right from the beginning as the core process, which is why we have designers that are embedded in the Scrum team. It's a centralized function, but it's critical in the upfront phases to, take the vision or the strategy and bring that to life for a developer, especially in Scrum, to be able to understand the context and what they're building and help get them to be creative. They want to see what it's going to look like. And so we don't think about UI or the user experience, which is much more than just the colors and the scheme, right? It's thought up front. It's not left to the end at all. It's very much an embedded and core part of the design process right from the beginning.
All right, next question. Over there. Yes.
So we are doing Agile in our world. We are service providers, SaaS as well. And we found that Agile works well with product management, dev tests, the traditional members of the team. But then you issue the code to ops. The people will go and test it in pre-prod and then deploy it in prod. And that world is very not Agile typically in its processes. It's very control change based, right? How do you do that in your world? Do you have a member of the ops world in your Scrum teams, or how does it work?
We are a no software company, right? So jokes apart, well, Steve talked about this earlier too. I think some of the keys to the infrastructure that we need to make this successful is having continuous integration. And there isn't a separate process where we are handing off code to the tech ops team to release. As part of our development process, code is coming in every day, being checked in by the entire technology, members of the technology team, right? So as and when they check in, there's a pre-check-in process where we are running some of the automation and ensuring that the check-in is not going to break the build. And only when we've gone through that does the code come into the build infrastructure. And the build actually is at least 3 or 4 times a day we are building, and the entire organization is using the latest and greatest version. There isn't any outdated or lag between when code comes in and what the rest of the organization is using. So you're synced to the latest. And when we are getting ready to do the release, there's obviously a period where we do feature freeze and release freeze, and check-ins after that are extremely limited to critical fixes. But in terms of working with the tech ops team, when we start the product planning phase, if there's going to be an impact to our infrastructure in terms of we need more hardware, or for Shadow, for example, it's going to increase the usage on production, we need to start the planning process with our technical operations team pretty early on to do the capacity planning and work with them to ensure that the features that we release we're going to be able to support it on production.
And for some of the areas where we're doing, say, something with our storage layer, there is a member from our operations team on the team.
And the other thing I'll add is our operations team, believe it or not, actually is also using an iterative model. So our whole operations organization is broken up into specific Scrum teams where they have DBAs and sysadmins, et cetera, and they're essentially also trying to build in an iterative way. So they're much more familiar with the model than they might be in some other operations organization. What I would say is it's more challenging in building out infrastructure and doing it in an iterative way, which is not the topic of this conversation, but we certainly could talk to you about that afterwards. Next question. In the back.
You talked about how you eliminated using status reports in meetings and those kinds of things. So I wanted to understand, what is the nature of the interactions of the teams? What do you do all day? Do you sit at a whiteboard?
Eliminated is a slight exaggeration.
Okay.
Reduced, maybe. So every team has a daily meeting. We actually do status emails at the end of the week. Our goal is ultimately transparency in the organization, and we try to reduce things that aren't being used, like Steve was mentioning, like things people don't read. But if it adds value, we still keep it in the organization. So the main structure is a sprint planning meeting, daily meetings for the team, and then a sprint review where we review at the end of the month, and then a retrospective. Those are the kind of main core meetings. But then my calendar is all meetings. I wish I could reduce that, but
think it's about eliminating waste at the appropriate levels. So previously, before we moved to this model, we were getting to a point where since the team grew to, the teams that worked on a specific feature, it kept growing. And the number of meetings they had to attend and provide insight or have discussions, that's what we wanted to eliminate. So the teams that's working on a specific feature, the people that actually do the work, as we call them, they should not be forced to attend meetings or provide status reports. So their meetings, the best teams would have just a short meeting of 15 minutes every day, and they're providing visibility into what they're doing for their team members. But all the status reporting and everything that you need in order to get, especially as a public company, we need to have a lot of scrutiny and transparency. All that we've automated to a large extent. You saw some of the tools, in fact, center stage yesterday, Scrum Force or QA Force or Bug Force, the tools that we built on our platform does a lot of the gathering of data, the analysis, and the status reporting too. So that's helped a lot to reduce the meetings.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that as a manager, it's great because I don't have to watch my people. There's so much transparency and visibility that, you're having the daily stand-up. We have a lot of tools and analytics that monitor bugs and features. And we hire really smart people, and we empower the teams to get the job done, and you just know it's going to get done. So as a manager, I find it very, very refreshing that I don't have to watch.
Next question, right here.
So coming from kind of the waterfall land, but I'm really interested in this agile thing, and I'm trying to just wrap my head around it. Could somebody summarize what's the difference between your agile methodology and what you had before? And so what I'm looking for, I heard you say shorter development cycles, so like 30 days. I think I heard you say smaller teams. I think I heard you say daily meetings. Are there like three or four other things that would summarize what the difference is from the before and the after?
Who'd like to try? Chris?
Sure,
Take a shot at
I'll
that?
start. So the goal is to get to a date-driven system where what scopes is feature set, as Mark was talking about, versus anything else. Like obviously, what happens in a waterfall release is you end up sort of mortgaging your people because you have a fixed scope, sort of fixed resource release, and so usually that you end up in sort of a death march situation. So what you want to do is get in a date-fixed situation where you're flexing scope and working in an iterative fashion. Probably the last thing to layer on there is reflecting on how to do things better each month and actually getting better at them. I mean, but the core thing for me is sort of date-driven with scope flexing.
I'd like to add that one of the biggest differences is that in a typical traditional waterfall model, you have different phases to your release cycle and how teams operate. You have different functional roles, and typically design happens first, usability needs to happen then development happens in a silo, and then quality team is handed off, the build is handed off to them to test and so on and so forth. For me, the biggest difference is the testing phase as such doesn't exist in an agile model, and a lot of the time what you're focusing on is to ensure that testing is about validation of absence of errors rather than the presence of it, because you start automating from day one. Your code is doing the job for you in terms of ensuring the stability of the code line, and hence there is really no distinct different functional phases to the release cycle.
As a designer, I like to use visual metaphors, so I'm going to explain it the way I see it when I look out the window from our office downtown, and I see the bay, and I see the really big ships, and I see the little ships, the little sailboats. You get one of those big tankers moving. They're great, they're powerful, they can move a lot, but if they get going in the wrong direction, it's really, really hard to turn them back on track. And then you get those little ships that are much more agile, and that's how I see our teams being a bunch of smaller sailboats that are agile, that can move when they need to move, and together we all get where we're going a lot faster, and we don't run into the bridge when we get off track.
All right, we have time for one more question. Do we have any other questions? In the back.
Do you work with offshore teams? And if you do, what is the best practice to include them in this agile development process?
We have a distributed team. For a long time, we were mainly our team was mainly based in San Francisco. Now we've started to expand. For me, the single best practice is to do all the functions in that remote office. So rather than saying doing QA in India and development in the United States, take the whole product along with the product manager and put it in that location so you can get that whole team working together versus creating essentially a delay between in communication between the team that's doing one piece of the work and the team that has to do another piece of the work. But there's no easy solution to distributed teams. It's hard to make it effective.
One thing I'd like to add to that is leverage technology as much as possible. When code location is really important, so all members of the team are co-located, but if that's not possible, then encourage them to have video conferencing when they do their daily stand-up, and as much as possible, increase the direct communication between those team members. It's really simple these days. You have laptops that come in with inbuilt video cameras, so you just can do your daily stand-up. You might not be in the same room, but make sure they are having that transparent communication. It makes a big difference.
Okay, I'd like to thank our panelists for spending the time with us this morning and having the courage to talk about how we do it at Salesforce. I'd also like to thank you for the opportunity to expose you all to this. Some final quick announcements. As many of you saw yesterday on the stage, Computer Associates is now building an agile planning tool on Force.com that can be very useful for your organization. And it's based on the ScrumForce application that we use internally at Salesforce that we built also on Force.com. You can find out more by going to booth 902 and talking to the Computer Associates folks. And of course, there are resources for you. This session was recorded. The deck that I showed here is also available at developer.force.com/Dreamforce. And then finally, in the Agile model, we love feedback. We're feedback junkies, so please take the time to fill out the session questionnaire and the different locations that you can do that. We really would like your feedback so we can improve this for you again next year. So thank you all very much.